Control doesn't get taken from you in one dramatic moment. It slips away in small, quiet choices you barely register. Morning is usually where it starts. Your eyes open, and the mind is already moving, dragging yesterday into today, replaying what you didn't finish, predicting what could go wrong, stacking pressure on top of a day that hasn't even begun. Before you've stood up, you're already reacting. That inner voice feels familiar, so you assume it's you. It isn't. It's a system. And a lot of people live thinking they're making decisions, but most of the day runs on autopilot. The hand reaches for the phone without permission. The attention drifts without direction. The brain jumps from thought to thought, then calls it normal. Hours get spent in loops that don't build anything, and somehow it still feels like life is happening to you. That isn't a character flaw, it's conditioning. The mind wasn't built for purpose, it was built for survival. Its job is to keep you safe, and safe by its definition means familiar. Familiar routines, familiar pain, familiar distractions, even if the familiar life is slowly shrinking you. So it protects you the only way it knows how. It steers you away from discomfort. It pulls you toward quick relief. It makes later feel reasonable. It makes comfort feel logical. And if you never notice what's happening, you don't just lose a day, you lose years. Call it procrastination. Call it overthinking. Call it being stuck. Underneath all of it is the same problem. If you don't take the wheel, your mind will drive. Watch what happens. The moment you try to do something that matters, you sit down with good intentions. The plan is clear, the goal is real. Then resistance shows up. Not as panic, not as obvious fear, but as a low hum in your chest, a tiny discomfort that makes avoidance feel like relief. That discomfort turns into a thought, not right now, then another. You'll do it later. Then something small to take the edge off. Check your phone first, get a drink. Just reset for a second. Next thing you know, time is gone. It didn't feel like you made a choice because you didn't. Your mind created the tension, then offered the escape route, then rewarded itself for taking it. The brain learns fast. Avoiding discomfort works, and every time you repeat that loop, it becomes easier to repeat again. This is why people keep falling into the same patterns, not because they're lazy, but because the mind is excellent at protecting comfort and terrible at building futures. It will feed you thoughts that sound reasonable, not because they're true, but because they keep you where you are. Even worse, the thoughts use your own voice, so they feel like instructions, not suggestions. A single thought can hijack an entire day. A single emotion can rewrite your self-belief. A single distraction can become a lifestyle. And the scary part isn't that this happens. It's that it happens so often you stop noticing. You start treating impulses as identity. You start confusing feelings with facts. You start living inside whatever the mind generates. That's the trap. Your life moves in the direction of your attention. If attention is constantly pulled, hijacked, and scattered, you can't build momentum, only motion. So, here's the line in the sand. Either you learn to direct your mind, or you live under its direction. There's something important you need to understand before anything changes. Inside your head, there isn't one voice. There are two systems competing for control, and they don't want the same future. One of them is old, automatic, fast. It reacts before you think. It looks for threats, comfort, shortcuts, relief. This part of your mind doesn't plan. It responds. It doesn't care about your long-term goals. It cares about keeping things easy right now. This is the part that flinches at uncertainty, the part that scrolls instead of starts, the part that chooses the familiar path even when it leads nowhere. The other system is slower, quieter, intentional. It's the part of you that can think ahead, the part that understands consequence, the part that imagines a better version of your life and knows what it would take to build it. That part doesn't shout, it doesn't force, it suggests. And most of the time, it gets ignored. The imbalance isn't your fault. The reactive mind has had thousands of years of practice. It's wired directly into your emotions and body. It can pull your attention instantly. The intentional mind, on the other hand, needs effort to activate. It gets tired. It requires decision. So if you never deliberately engage it, it never gets stronger. This is why it feels like you know what to do, but don't do it. Why insight doesn't turn into action. Why motivation fades the moment discomfort appears. The reactive mind isn't evil. It's efficient, but left in charge, it will trade your future for short-term relief every time. Growth doesn't fail because you lack desire. It fails because the wrong system is driving. Until you consciously choose which part of the mind leads, the louder voice wins by default. Most people lose this internal battle without realizing it's happening. They assume every thought deserves attention. They treat every emotion as a command. They confuse mental noise with truth. When anxiety shows up, they follow it. When doubt appears, they obey it. When distraction calls, they answer. Over time, the mind builds a story, a narrative about who you are, what you're capable of, and what you should expect from life. That story feels solid because it's been repeated for years, but repetition doesn't make something real. It just makes it familiar. I'm not disciplined. I'm just not wired that way. I've always struggled with this. Those aren't facts. They're conclusions your mind reached to explain patterns it created. Once an identity forms, everything bends to protect it. Behavior that contradicts it feels uncomfortable. Action that threatens it triggers resistance. Even opportunities start to feel risky. Not because they are, but because they challenge the version of you your mind is trying to preserve. This is how people stay trapped in lives they've outgrown. They don't consciously choose limits. They inherit them. Then they defend them. The mind loves consistency more than progress. If you believe you're a certain type of person, it will generate emotions and thoughts that keep that belief intact, even if it costs you growth. Here's the shift that changes everything. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not the story running in your head. You are the awareness, noticing all of it. And awareness is where control begins. Once you can step back and observe what your mind is doing, instead of automatically following it, the grip starts to loosen. Not instantly, not magically, but consistently. And consistency is what rewires control. If you want proof of who's really in control, look at where your attention goes when you don't guide it. Attention isn't neutral, it's directional. Wherever it moves, your thoughts follow. Wherever your thoughts go, your emotions line up behind them. Over time, your life reshapes itself around whatever consistently holds your focus. That's why attention is more valuable than time. Time passes, no matter what. Attention decides what that time turns into. Right now, your attention is under constant pressure. Notifications, headlines, endless content, autoplay, recommendations engineered to keep pulling you deeper. None of this exists by accident. Entire systems are designed around one objective, keeping your focus captured. Every interruption trains your mind to expect another one. Every quick check lowers your tolerance for depth. Every moment of divided attention weakens your ability to stay present. The result isn't just distraction, it's dependency. When your mind gets used to constant stimulation, silence starts to feel uncomfortable. Focus feels heavy, stillness feels wrong. And instead of recognizing that as withdrawal, people assume something is wrong with them. So they reach for more noise. A distracted mind can stay busy forever without moving forward. It can consume endlessly without creating anything. It can stay exhausted without ever doing meaningful work. This is why control starts with attention. Not productivity hacks, not motivation, not intensity. If you can't hold your focus, you can't build momentum. And if you can't build momentum, every goal stays theoretical. Distraction isn't a minor issue. It's a form of control. Left alone, the mind doesn't wander toward clarity or confidence. It drifts toward familiar emotional territory. For most people, That means replaying the past or worrying about the future. Regret, comparison, imagined conversations, worst-case scenarios. The mind treats these loops as useful, even when they solve nothing. There's a reason for that. The brain is biased toward threat. One negative experience leaves a deeper imprint than multiple positive ones. One criticism weighs more than 10 compliments. This bias once kept humans alive. Now it keeps people stuck. A single mistake becomes a defining moment. A small setback turns into a personal failure. Uncertainty fills itself with imagined disaster. Without intervention, the mind amplifies negativity by default, not because life is always bad, but because the brain is trained to scan for danger. And in a modern world, danger often shows up as social judgment, self-doubt, and imagined loss. That's how spirals begin. One thought creates tension. The tension feeds another thought. Soon, the body reacts as if something terrible is happening, even when nothing is. This is how people lie awake at night, mentally solving problems that don't exist. This is how confidence erodes without a single real failure. This is how potential gets buried under noise. The key insight is simple but uncomfortable. Thoughts are not facts. Emotions are not instructions. They're signals, often distorted ones. Until you learn to separate what your mind produces from what actually deserves attention, you'll keep reacting to illusions instead of acting on reality. Control doesn't mean silence. It means discernment. And that's a skill you can train. At some point, the mind stops reacting moment to moment and starts locking things in. It forms an identity, not in a dramatic way, quietly, through patterns, through repetition, through conclusions drawn when you were younger and didn't know better. Experiences get interpreted, then turned into labels. Those labels become assumptions. Eventually, the assumptions feel permanent. I'm just not consistent. I'm not confident like other people. I've always struggled with discipline. Once those ideas take root, the mind treats them as rules. Anything that challenges them feels wrong. Anything that supports them feels familiar. Without realizing it, you begin protecting an identity that limits you. This is one of the strongest control mechanisms the mind has. If you believe you're bad at something, effort feels unnatural. If you believe you're not built for a certain life, opportunity feels threatening. If you believe change would make you someone else, growth feels unsafe. So, the mind creates resistance, not to punish you, but to keep the story intact. That's why people say they want change, but sabotage it the moment it becomes real. Not because they don't want better, but because better requires becoming unfamiliar, and unfamiliar triggers alarm. The mind prefers a predictable struggle over an uncertain upgrade. This is how people stay in cycles for years while telling themselves they're working on it. The identity never gets questioned, so behavior never truly changes. But identity isn't truth. It's memory reinforced by habit, and anything built through repetition can be rebuilt the same way. Here's what most people never stop to consider. The identity running their life was never consciously chosen. Pieces came from parents, pieces came from school, pieces came from comments made in moments that shouldn't have mattered. The mind stitched all of it together and called it you. Once that identity exists, the brain filters reality through it. Evidence that supports it gets highlighted. Evidence that contradicts it gets ignored or explained away. This isn't intentional. It's efficient. The mind wants internal consistency more than truth. So when you try to act outside that identity, discomfort shows up. Not because you're wrong, but because you're unfamiliar. Growth feels awkward. New behavior feels forced. Confidence feels fake. That's not failure. That's transition. The problem is, most people retreat the moment discomfort appears. They assume it means they're pretending. They tell themselves, this isn't really me. And the old identity pulls them back in. But discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that the system is being challenged. You don't become someone new by feeling ready. You become someone new by acting before it feels natural. Repetition turns behavior into habit. Habit reshapes identity. The mind will resist this at first. That's expected. It will offer doubt, it will manufacture excuses, it will remind you of the past. Not because the past defines you, but because it's familiar. Control begins the moment you stop asking, "Is this who I am?" and start asking, "Who am I choosing to become today?" That question changes everything. Most people believe emotions just happen to them. Something occurs, a feeling appears, and the assumption is that the feeling is the truth of the situation. But emotions don't arrive out of nowhere. They're built step by step by how the mind interprets what happens. An event by itself is neutral. The meaning assigned to it is what creates the emotion. Two people can experience the same situation and walk away feeling completely different. One feels rejected, the other feels indifferent. One spirals, the other moves on. The difference isn't strength or toughness, it's interpretation. The mind constantly narrates reality. It explains what things mean, and those explanations shape how you feel, how you act, and how you remember the moment later. When a message goes unanswered, the mind can label it as rejection. When a plan falls through, it can label it as failure. When something feels uncertain, it can label it as danger. Each label creates a different emotional response, even though the external facts stay the same. The danger is that these interpretations happen fast and automatically. You don't hear the reasoning process, you only feel the result. Anxiety, frustration, shame, doubt. So you assume the emotion is justified. But emotions are reactions to thoughts, not to reality itself. They're information, not commands. They tell you how your mind is interpreting something, not whether that interpretation is accurate. Until you see this clearly, emotions will continue to steer your behavior. You'll avoid action because you feel anxious. You'll hesitate because doubt shows up. You'll retreat because discomfort feels like a warning. Control doesn't come from suppressing emotion. It comes from understanding where it came from. Once you see how emotions are built, something shifts. You stop treating every feeling as a signal to act. You start recognizing patterns. Certain thoughts reliably create certain emotions. Certain interpretations reliably lead to certain behaviors. The process becomes visible. And visibility changes power. When anxiety appears, you can ask what story triggered it. When frustration shows up, you can trace it back to the expectation underneath it. When doubt surfaces, you can identify the assumption it's protecting. This doesn't remove emotion. It gives you space. Space between feeling and reaction. Space between thought and action. That space is where control lives. Most people never pause there. They move straight from emotion to behavior. They send the text. They abandon the task. They distract themselves. They shut down. Over time, these reactions become habits. Habits become personality traits. Personality traits become identity. I'm anxious. I'm emotional. I overthink. Those aren't fixed traits. They're practiced responses. The mind repeats what it's rewarded for. If avoidance brings relief, it gets reinforced. If distraction reduces discomfort, it becomes automatic. If spiraling feels familiar, it stays accessible. But practice works both ways. Every time you feel an emotion and choose not to obey it, you weaken the old pattern. Every time you act in alignment with intention instead of impulse, you strengthen a new one. Control isn't about forcing calm. It's about acting with clarity even when calm isn't there. And that's a skill, one that compounds over time. Real control begins with a single shift in perspective. Instead of trying to fix your thoughts, you start watching them. Most people live inside their mind. Every thought feels personal. Every mental image feels important. Every story feels real. There's no separation, just a constant stream of commentary that dictates mood and behavior. Observation changes that. The moment you notice a thought as a thought, it loses some of its grip. It stops being a command and becomes an object, something you can look at rather than live inside. This isn't suppression, it's distance. You don't need to argue with your mind or force it to be quiet. You just need to recognize when it's speaking. That awareness alone interrupts the automatic loop. Instead of thinking, I'm not capable, you notice there's the thought that I'm not capable. Instead of feeling consumed by anxiety, you notice the sensation and the story attached to it. That shift sounds small, but it changes everything. It places you back in the position of observer rather than prisoner. Most thoughts don't disappear when observed. They lose urgency. They stop demanding immediate action. And once that happens, choice becomes possible again. You don't gain control by silencing the mind. You gain it by no longer being owned by it. Awareness isn't a single moment of clarity. It's a practice. You don't need to track every thought. That's impossible. You just need to notice patterns as they appear. Certain situations trigger certain narratives. Certain emotions come with predictable stories. Once you recognize them, they stop surprising you. When you feel resistance, notice the thought behind it. When you avoid action, notice the justification that appeared. When distraction pulls you away, notice what discomfort you were escaping. Most people never slow down enough to see this. They live at the speed of reaction. Awareness forces a pause, and that pause breaks the chain. The goal isn't to control every thought. It's to choose which ones deserve attention. You'll still experience doubt. You'll still feel discomfort. You'll still hear the mind offering reasons to stop. The difference is that you won't mistake those messages for truth. They become background noise instead of instructions. With repetition, this changes how you move through the day. You catch spirals earlier. You recover faster. You act more deliberately. You stop being dragged from one mental state to another. Control doesn't arrive as confidence. It arrives as clarity. And clarity comes from awareness applied consistently, not perfectly. Understanding the mind isn't enough. Insight without action just becomes another form of entertainment. Control is built through structure, through boundaries, through repetition that slowly retrains where attention goes when it's left alone. The first place this shows up is at the start of the day. The opening moments after waking set the tone for everything that follows. The mind is most impressionable then. Whatever it consumes first becomes the filter for the rest of the day. When that time is filled with noise, messages, news, other people's problems, the mind spends the day reacting. Direction changes that. Delaying external input creates space. Even a short window without stimulation allows intention to take the lead. Instead of inheriting the day's narrative, you choose one. This isn't about discipline for its own sake. It's about protecting the mind when it's most vulnerable to influence. The goal is simple. Begin the day from choice instead of impulse. That single shift strengthens the part of the mind responsible for direction. Over time, it becomes easier to hold focus later because it was practiced early. Training always starts when resistance is lowest. Control also depends on what you allow to interrupt you. Attention can't be trained in chaos. If everything has access to your mind at all times, nothing gets full presence. Focus becomes impossible, not because you lack ability, but because the environment never allows it to form. Boundaries solve that. Certain periods of the day need to be protected. No notifications, no multitasking, no switching contexts, just one task, one direction, one stream of attention. At first, this feels uncomfortable. Restlessness shows up quickly. The mind looks for escape. That's not a sign of failure. It's evidence of conditioning being challenged. Each time you stay with the task despite discomfort, you're training a new response. You're showing the mind that distraction isn't required for relief. Short, deliberate periods of focus rebuild the ability to concentrate. Length matters less than consistency. Even brief sessions compound when practiced daily. This is how attention becomes reliable again. This is how intention starts to win. Control isn't forced, it's trained. And what you train repeatedly becomes your default. If attention is the front line, reflection is the reset. Most mental loops don't stay powerful because they're true. They stay powerful because they're never examined. The mind repeats what it hasn't finished processing. Unresolved thoughts recycle themselves, especially when the day ends without closure. That's why the mind gets loud at night. When external stimulation drops away, everything you avoided thinking about resurfaces. Tasks unfinished, conversations replayed, imagined futures rewritten over and over. The mind doesn't do this to torture you. It does it to offload unresolved material. Giving it an outlet changes the pattern. Taking a few minutes to externalize thoughts, writing them down, listing concerns, clarifying next actions, signals completion. It tells the mind those items don't need to be held anymore. Once they're stored somewhere reliable, the mind can let go. This isn't journaling for insight. It's mental hygiene. Regularly emptying the mind prevents buildup. It reduces background noise. It weakens repetitive loops by removing their urgency. When thoughts are seen clearly, they stop demanding attention. When they stop demanding attention, they lose control. Clarity doesn't come from thinking more. It comes from thinking less, but more deliberately. Patterns only become visible when you look back. Day to day, thoughts feel random. Over time, they're anything but. The same themes appear. The same triggers create the same reactions. The same excuses surface at predictable moments. Seeing this requires distance. Periodic review exposes the programs running underneath behavior. What thoughts tend to show up before avoidance? What interpretations appear before anxiety? What narratives justify distraction? Once identified, those patterns lose their authority. You stop treating them as spontaneous truths and start recognizing them as habits. Habits can be replaced. Replacement doesn't mean erasing old thoughts. It means interrupting them early and redirecting attention deliberately. Over time, the new response becomes easier to access than the old one. This is how the mind is retrained. Not through force, through repetition and awareness. The goal isn't perfection. Slips will happen. Old loops will resurface. What matters is shortening the time between noticing and correcting. Each interruption weakens the old pattern. Each redirection strengthens a new one. Control grows quietly through consistency, not intensity. Here's what control actually looks like in real life. Not confidence, not constant calm, not motivation on demand. It looks like noticing when the mind starts pulling you off course and choosing not to follow. You wake up and the familiar noise starts, pressure, reminders, mental clutter. Instead of reacting, you pause. You decide where attention goes first. That choice alone shifts the direction of the day. You sit down to work and resistance appears. The urge to delay shows up right on schedule. Instead of negotiating with it, you recognize it. You begin anyway, not perfectly, not effortlessly, just deliberately. You feel discomfort and don't immediately escape it. You feel doubt and don't obey it. You feel anxiety and still move forward. That's control, not the absence of internal resistance, but the ability to act without needing it to disappear. Every time you do this, you reinforce a new relationship with your mind. It starts to learn that discomfort doesn't equal danger, that distraction isn't required for relief, that you're capable of choosing direction even when it protests. Control isn't dramatic. It's quiet, it's repeated, and it compounds. What most people miss is that control is never decided once. It's decided daily. Every moment where attention is directed instead of stolen, every thought that's questioned instead of believed, every emotion that's felt without being obeyed. Those moments add up. One choice doesn't change your life. 1,000 similar choices do. The mind learns from repetition. It follows patterns that are reinforced consistently. When control becomes habitual, something shifts. Focus comes back faster, spirals shorten, decisions feel clearer. Not because the mind stopped producing noise, but because you stopped treating that noise as authority. You begin trusting your ability to respond instead of react. That trust changes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who struggles with discipline. You stop defining yourself by old habits. You stop negotiating with limitations that no longer apply. The mind adapts to leadership. When it sees consistency, it falls in line. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough. Enough to build momentum, enough to sustain progress, enough to change direction. Here's the truth most people avoid. Your mind will always try to take the easy path. It will always offer comfort over growth. It will always resist uncertainty. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. The mistake is expecting the mind to cooperate before acting. Cooperation comes later. Action comes first. You don't wait until the noise stops. You move while it's there. Each time you choose direction over impulse, you reinforce control. Each time you protect attention, you reclaim ownership. Each time you act in alignment with intention instead of emotion, you weaken the old system. This is how people quietly separate themselves from the majority. Not through talent, not through luck, through control practiced daily. The difference between someone who drifts and someone who builds isn't intelligence or motivation. It's who's in charge when discomfort shows up. That's the dividing line. This is the choice in front of you. Not today only. Not just after this moment. Every day going forward, you can continue letting the mind pull you wherever it wants, letting attention fragment, letting emotions dictate behavior, letting old identities decide what's possible. Or you can step into control. Not perfectly, not aggressively, consistently. You don't need to master your mind, you just need to lead it. Direction beats intensity. Awareness beats force. Consistency beats everything. Your mind will either control you, or it will become a tool you use deliberately. There is no middle ground. There is only practice. So the question isn't whether you understand this. The question is whether you'll apply it when it matters, when resistance shows up, when distraction calls, when discomfort tries to take over. That's where control is proven. And that's where your life changes direction.